Our next speaker is Dr. Dawn Merrett. She is a former music teacher turned clinical researcher. She completed a master's and PhD in clinical neuropsychology at the University of Melbourne in Australia, doing research that focused on how singing training changes the brain and behavior. She has investigated singing training longitudinally in both healthy adults and in individuals with language impairments after stroke. Dawn is currently a postdoctoral fellow at BRAMS at the University of Montreal, working with Professor Isabelle Peretz on projects related to music-induced neuroplasticity and on the mechanisms by which singing can promote health and well-being. Welcome, Dawn.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here today and to present to you a new project that we are just getting going, thanks to SingWell. I had hoped that I would have enrolled a few participants and have some very preliminary data to present to you, but we're not quite there yet due to some equipment delays. So today, I'll be presenting the rationale, the study design and methodology, and the expected outcomes of this project on group singing. So as Frank said in the introduction, my background is on singing-induced neuroplasticity, and including in aphasia. So when I was reviewing the literature on aphasia during my PhD, then how singing might be effective, I was really struck by the fact that it might not only directly affect communication, through enhancing fluency for speech and language, but almost every discussion section of papers in this field mention the fact that there's another reason why singing might be effective, and that's because it's enjoyable and motivating. And that really got me interested in this idea of how does singing actually affect health and well-being? So not just the direct effects potentially on communication disorders, but these indirect effects that might make rehabilitation more effective in general. So I really thought, okay, singing is a great option because it can probably kind of maybe go down both of these pathways. So I think in this context, I probably don't need to spend very much time trying to convince you that singing does seem to have a big impact on health and well-being. And I know that some of this evidence is stronger than others. I mean, this morning we had a very important talk about how some of the previous research has some weaknesses that haven't always been acknowledged. But the literature does suggest that singing can lead to improved mood and mental health outcomes. It boosts happiness and decreases negative affect, increases social connectedness, reduces stress, and even can improve immune function. So many of these effects have been shown in both healthy and in clinical populations. But my question of interest is, how is singing actually able to do this? Because I think that unless we understand what aspects of the singing experience are leading to these effects, we don't really have a way to optimize our singing experiences to make sure that those effects are as useful and as strong as possible. So there are a lot of possibilities or factors within a singing experience that could moderate its effectiveness or be a potential mechanism by which it exerts positive effects. And some of these are more specific to singing, but most are elements that could occur in other activities as well. And the mechanisms and factors that I'm going to mention here are not mutually exclusive. And I would suggest that perhaps the fact that there are so many ways in which singing could affect us, that's probably key. Singing may be particularly generalizable and work more broadly because it can actually tap into so many different things. So I'm not going to make an exhaustive list here, because if I went through the entire literature, that would take a long time, a lot longer than 12 minutes. So some really important mechanisms, I think, that are really relevant in the rehabilitation context are I'll mention a few here. Expectations and familiarity and competence, I think, are a little bit understudied, perhaps. There could be a little bit of placebo effect, perhaps, related to singing. So if people expect it to be useful to them, it probably will be. And there's some interesting research by Lonsdale and Day that found when they compared group and solo activities across singing and other instrument playing and physical activities, that they didn't really see a singing advantage, but they found that if an individual felt that they could get good at what they were doing, that produced a well-being boost. So I think that a sense of competence could play a role, and a person's background familiarity might be really important. Another one, Robin Dunbar suggested that it might not be the singing itself, but the movement that's associated with singing that might lead to, stronger effects on neurochemistry and mood. Another possibility is breathing and changing that aspect of physiology. So another project that was led by Alexandra Lehman, and Isabel was involved in that project. It suggests that these physiological changes that are induced by singing, particularly the slower breathing patterns that singing could induce, that might be an important mechanism for health and well-being. And there's a pretty large research literature now on the influence of synchrony with others on mood, connectedness, and well-being. And of course, we can't forget about the social bonds that can form. And I think particularly of a study by Pierce and colleagues, where they showed that singing was particularly effective at forming fast social bonds. And so they called it the icebreaker effect, that compared to doing other activities together, singing made you feel more bonded to a group very quickly. And there's many other factors that could moderate, I think, the effectiveness of singing for well-being. And I don't have time to go through them all, but when we started thinking, okay, if we want to look at factors like group size, how does that work? Or present, like in-person versus virtual type studies. I mean, in the pandemic context, that's on everybody's mind. We realized that this group bonding piece was really a potentially important one, because we wanted to be able to make sure that if we designed studies that were within subjects, that there wasn't potential differences in group bonding, if that is one of the things that's really influencing the health and well-being outcomes. So previous research on the singing and well-being stuff has suggested that the context really matters, that group singing leads to much greater benefits for endocrine and immune function, physiological arousal, stress, mood, all those things that we've mentioned already. That's better than solo singing. But we actually, when we reviewed this literature, we realized that there's one critical flaw with this research, and I shouldn't call it a flaw. I'm incredibly grateful for the very challenging studies that people have done in this area. But they've all been in pre-existing choirs. So, that convenient sampling issue. And I thought about it and I thought, if I was in a choir and I really enjoyed singing my part in that choir with everyone else, and then one day at choir, they said, okay, you're going to be in this research study if you agree. Now go sing by yourself in that room over there and see, how you're feeling before and after. I don't think that I would like that. I would think that would be like a punishment almost. So we thought, that's a potential confound in the previous literature, which has been very converging on this idea that group is more important than, more effective than solo singing. So we question, is it the singing or is it the group in group singing? And how important is the social bonding? And what other mechanisms might also be involved? So we started coming up with some research questions, and I'm going to just quickly review those and then show you the design that we're hoping to use to address this. So does singing or group and the group bonding have a bigger influence in the group singing effects on well-being? How do group singing effects on mood and well-being evolve over time? Because as we know, if singing induces fast social bonding, it's probably good for us to have an idea of when exactly that's occurring. Does it happen right away in a single session? Do you have to see the same people for several times in a row to feel bonded to them? So far, they've looked at 1 month, and that 1 month was enough to make people feel bonded, but does it happen even sooner than that? Does a choir need to bond to be effective at improving mood and well-being? And then we also, when thinking about other potential mechanisms, wondered, could this possibly be mediated by synchronizing with others? And if you are familiar with them, can you synchronize better? And does that, improve the bonding experience? So to look at this, we've designed a study. It's kind of big, unfortunately, because we can't really do this within subjects. We have to do it between subjects. So we're aiming to try and get 72. We'll use the sequential analysis to try and ensure that we have actually been able to answer the question yes or no to our main hypotheses. So we will keep collecting data if we realize that we don't have enough power. It's really hard with a study like this to estimate the power appropriately. We will use non-vulnerable adults given our pandemic context, and we will have them sing. They'll come after some online screening where we'll get a little bit of information about their music experience and their demographics, and also ensure that they are not in music because and that they're able to sing fairly well, because it won't be a very bonding experience if we put really poor singers in with people who want to sing. And then we'll have them familiarized with singing in the lab so that it's not quite so scary the first time they come to do it. And then we will divide them into 3 groups. And one of the groups will be the same across the month of singing sessions that they do each week. And one of the singing groups that they will do will be novel each and every week. And then the final group will be solo singers. So this will allow us to tease apart the effects of group versus singing, and also group bonding with a group that you're familiar with versus just the actual singing in synchrony with other people. We'll have them sing for about 40 minutes. That seems to be the amount of time that has been suggested to be sufficient to ensure that we're creating the effects that we're hoping to see. And we're using some novel songs that nobody there has heard before, a variety of songs. I don't even know if I can play this or not. Okay, but it's just to give you an idea. It's a simple piano accompaniment. And doesn't look like it's going to play today. Just a second ago, it was at least showing that it was playing, but I've got a lullaby, a nonsense song, just pop style music, something that, so a variety of different things. And we've tried to kind of balance it out so that as they go through, they have something that's kind of equally arousing to do for each week. And we will collect cortisol and visual mood scales before and after each singing session. And we'll also use the intrinsic motivation inventory and inclusion of other in the self scale at the end of each session. And this allows us to kind of gauge how much they feel like they belong in their group, and also try to get at that idea of competency, because the intrinsic motivation inventory has a competency section in it that will allow us to see whether or not their feelings of competence and ability to master singing are changing over time, and whether that tracks with their mood and well-being scores. We also have the opportunity to have physiological measures of heart rate variability, breathing, and movement, so that we can check synchrony in these various physiological aspects. That was a really, really brief overview. But what we hope to be able to do is to get some practical information regarding the use of singing for rehabilitation, for communication disorders, and just for singing-based research and intervention more generally, including like how consistent does choir membership need to be to have optimal effects on well-being. If group bonding is important, we need to think about our groups and how they're composed and how consistent they are. When to expect well-being effects to emerge in longitudinal choir studies. So that would really inform the timing of our data collection for future studies in this area, and really provide that foundation for future research into moderating factors. Because if we know how group bonding influences things, we may be able to design within group studies that are going to be, better powered and a little bit easier for us to recruit enough participants. So the ultimate goal is to have that greater understanding of the role of the singing context, so group and group bonding versus singing itself, and of the contributions of other potential mechanisms of action, so that we can really optimize our singing-based interventions. So with that, I just want to say thanks to Isabel, who has provided lots of valuable advice as we've been trying to design this study. And there's many members of our lab back in Montreal who have helped with this. Some undergraduate RAs have been working, helping me with getting things going. And many others have helped as well. And I just wanted to say thanks to the Research Health Fund of Quebec, who have provided fellowship funding for me. Bronze is supporting our study in a big way, and of course, so thank you so much.
So I really like this study so much. It's a great study. I wonder about controlling for practice effects during the week. Are they allowed to sing songs that they learned?
That's a good point. I don't know whether or not they will remember them well enough if we're not sending home.
Okay, so you're not enabling that.
That's right.
to
We're
do
not
that.
enabling practice during the week.
And what is the individual singing experience like? Could you just explain that?
What the singing experience would be
For
like.
the individual, when you
Right,
solo.
So just like in the group singing environment, we will have a facilitator who will be there to control for how many repetitions are going to be done during that singing experience, and to make sure that they are singing as continuously as possible. And they will be, because the songs are novel, we'll start by having them introduced with the piano and voice. The voice will gradually fade out so the person can continue on their own. And they will have lyrics in front of them so that they're not stumbling over those and trying to learn them at the same time as the tune. So there is that group singing experience for those first few times of going through the song and trying to just sing along with the recording. And then they will just sing by themselves. But we felt that if they don't have an example to follow, it'll be too hard to learn the new songs.
So there's could you say the facilitator?
So a musically trained facilitator. So somebody who has choir directing experience, although they won't actually be directing the participants, but they will help them to come in and stay together, so that in the group singing experience, we did not want a particular person to emerge as like the leader of the group or anything. We didn't want to have those kinds of dynamics happening. So we have somebody that will be facilitating and who will, help to, when we were piloting this project, not with just like looking at the songs that we were going to use, we did have feedback from our participants there that it would be better to get a little more feedback to say, oh, everyone needs to pay attention to this section. They wanted that kind of choir feedback. And so we're going to try to incorporate that if we can do it in a controlled enough way that it's not going to be really different across groups.
And one final question, to what extent is this like a singing lesson? These solos?
It won't be like a singing lesson because
it's different.
Yeah, there won't be any feedback like, oh, you should sing louder, you should sing faster, you should sing with better breath, you should stand up straight. We won't be giving that kind of direction.
So are they singing with the recorded music or somebody's playing?
It'll be recorded music because it's, I think, a little bit too hard to have the same pianist coming and playing it exactly the same way for every group through the whole study, because it'll be a lot of sessions.
So there is someone who starts playing the music, they sing back to back the songs, and they leave the room. And the solo person will go into the room, sing by herself, and get out of the room.
So
like that?
They'll all be doing it in the same environment, but the solo singers will just be coming in and doing it by themselves, whereas the groups will be coming in groups of 4. We chose 4. It's not a huge group. It's not like a full choir, but when we submitted the ethics during the pandemic, that was going to be hard enough to have a room where they were all able to stay more than 2 meters apart because of aerosols and everything. So we decided to stick with small groups. It also facilitates the switching to make everyone novel, because I mean, trying to have novel groups of 12 or 8 even would be really complex. You'd end up with other people that you do.
Yeah, I taught all of them.
Yeah. So we'll.